The day I planted that bamboo forest, Karen's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. But what she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd just unleashed something that would haunt this HOA for the next 50 years, and it was 100% legal. I'm standing in my backyard on a beautiful April morning in 2023, holding a small bamboo shoot that cost me exactly $47.99 from the local nursery. My name is Tom Richardson. I'm 62 years old, and I'm about to commit what I like to call horticultural warfare. Let me back up 6 months. When my wife Patricia and I moved into Metabrook Estates, we thought we'd found paradise. The neighborhood was beautiful. The houses were well maintained, and our HOA president, Barbara Chun, seemed like a genuinely nice person. She welcomed us with homemade cookies and a warm smile, explaining that the HOA existed to maintain property values while giving homeowners reasonable freedom to enjoy their properties. We're not like those nightmare HOAs you read about online, Barbara had told us, her eyes crinkling with kindness. We just want everyone to be happy and take pride in their homes. For the first 3 months, that seemed absolutely true. Then Karen Whitmore moved in next door. Karen was 55 years old, recently divorced, and apparently determined to make that everyone else's problem. She had perfectly styled blonde hair that never moved in the wind, designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and a permanent expression that suggested she'd just bitten into a lemon. The problems started small. Karen complained that our mailbox was 2 inches too far to the left. Then she said our doormat was an unapproved color because it was navy blue instead of black. When we planted some roses along our fence line, she measured them and filed a formal complaint that they extended 3.5 inches into the setback zone. Barbara, bless her heart, tried to be diplomatic. She'd knock on our door apologetically, holding yet another complaint form from Karen. "I'm so sorry, Tom," Barbara would say, looking genuinely pained. "Karen, is." Well, she's very particular. I know these complaints are ridiculous, but as HOA president, I have to process them. Just move the mailbox a couple inches and we'll call it resolved. Okay? I didn't mind too much at first. Patricia and I would joke about having a professional complainer as a neighbor. We'd laugh it off and make the tiny adjustments Karen demanded. But Karen wasn't satisfied with small victories. In July of 2023, I decided to plant a vegetable garden. Nothing fancy, just some tomatoes, cucumbers, and bell peppers in a neat 10-foot by 10-foot plot in my backyard. I checked the HOA rules carefully. Gardens were allowed as long as they were neat, well-maintained, and no larger than 100 square feet. My garden was 99 square feet. I made sure of it. Karen filed a complaint within 24 hours. The garden is an eyesore. Her complaint read, "It attracts pests and reduces property values. I demand its immediate removal." Barbara came over the next day, looking more frustrated than I'd ever seen her. "Tom, I measured your garden myself. It's completely within regulations. I'm denying Karen's complaint, but I wanted to give you a heads up she's not happy about it." "Let me guess," I said. "She's threatening to run for HOA president." Barbara laughed, but there was worry in her eyes. "Actually, she's threatening to sue the HOA for failing to enforce community standards. She can't win, but she can make all our lives miserable in the process." That's when the war really began. Karen began documenting every single aspect of my property. She took photos of my grass if it grew a 1/4 inch over the 3-inch maximum height. She measured the distance between my garbage cans and the curb with a tape measure. She even filed a complaint because my car was parked at an unapproved angle in my own driveway. The HOA board, led by the patient and reasonable Barbara, denied every single complaint. But processing them took time and effort, and I could see it was wearing Barbara down. "I've been HOA president for 8 years, Barbara told me one evening, sitting on my porch with a glass of iced tea. "I've dealt with difficult people before, but Karen is something else. She's filed 47 complaints in the last 2 months. 47? That's more than the entire neighborhood filed in the previous year combined." I felt terrible for Barbara. She was a retired teacher who volunteered her time to help the neighborhood, and Karen was treating her like a personal servant. Then came the incident that changed everything. In September of 2023, Patricia planted a butterfly garden in our front yard. She'd researched native plants that would attract butterflies and creating a beautiful, natural-looking space that was exactly 30 square feet well within HOA guidelines for decorative plantings. It was gorgeous. Within 2 weeks, we had monarchs, swallowtails, and painted ladies visiting daily. Our neighbors would stop during their evening walks to admire it. Everyone except Karen. She filed a complaint, calling it an uncontrolled weed patch. That violated community aesthetic standards. Barbara denied the complaint immediately, but Karen escalated. She called an emergency HOA meeting and demanded that the board create new rules, specifically banning wildflower gardens and native plant installations. I attended that meeting, so did about 30 other neighbors who'd gotten sick of Karen's nonsense. Barbara handled it beautifully. She stood at the front of the community center, her 5'2" frame somehow commanding the entire room. "I've reviewed Karen's proposal," Barbara said calmly, "and I'm recommending the board reject it unanimously. The Richardsons' butterfly garden is beautiful, environmentally friendly, and completely within our existing guidelines. Creating new rules to target one specific homeowner would be discriminatory and likely illegal." The board voted 4-0 to reject Karen's proposal. The room erupted in applause. Karen stood up, her face purple with rage. "This HOA is corrupt. Barbara Chun is showing favoritism. I will not stand for this." "Then sit down," someone called from the back, and the room erupted in laughter. Karen stormed out, but not before turning at the door to point at me. "You haven't won, Richardson. I'll find a way to make you regret moving here." That night, I couldn't sleep. Patria was upset. Barbara was exhausted from dealing with Karen's constant harassment, and I was angry. Not just annoyed, truly. Deeply angry. I'd spent 35 years as a civil engineer. I'd worked on projects all over the country, and I'd learned one important truth. There's always a solution if you're willing to look hard enough. So one started researching. I spent 3 weeks reading HOA regulations, state property laws, and environmental protection statutes. I learned about native species protections, invasive species management, and the legal rights of homeowners versus HOA restrictions. And that's when I found it. Bamboo, specifically a species called Phyllostachys Golda bamboo. It was classified as a protected heritage plant in our state. Part of a historical preservation act from the law had been passed to protect bamboo groves that had been planted by Asian immigrants in the early 1900s. Here's the beautiful part. Once bamboo is established on a property, it's extremely difficult to remove. The rhizome's underground root systems spread aggressively. They can travel up to 20 feet horizontally in a single growing season. They're nearly impossible to kill without professional excavation that can cost tens of thousands of dollars. And because it was a protected heritage species in our state, the HOA couldn't legally require its removal. I brought my research to Barbara first. I didn't want to blindside her. We met at a coffee shop in early October of 2023, and I laid out my plan. "Tom, are you sure about this?" Barbara asked, looking concerned. "I understand you're frustrated. God knows I am too, but bamboo is. Well, it's permanent, very permanent." "That's exactly the point," I said. "Karen has made it her mission to control every aspect of my property, so I'm going to give her something she can never, ever control. And it's completely legal." Barbara was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled a real, genuine smile. "The HOA can't stop you," she said, "but Karen is going to lose her mind." "I'm counting on it," I replied. I ordered 50 bamboo plants from a specialized nursery. The total cost was $2,395, worth every penny. The plants arrived on a crisp November morning. I spent the entire weekend planting them along the property line I shared with Karen, the western edge of my backyard, where her precious Zen meditation garden faced my yard. Each plant went into the ground 18 inches apart, creating a dense hedge that would grow to 15 feet tall within 2 years. The rhizomes would spread underground, creating an impenetrable network of roots that would last decades. I was planting the last one when I heard Karen's sliding glass door open. "What are you doing?" she shrieked. I straightened up, my back aching but my spirits high. "Planting bamboo, it's a protected heritage species, completely within my rights as a property owner." Karen's face went through an impressive spectrum of colors: red, purple, something approaching magenta. "You can't plant that, eat, wheel spread. It will destroy property values. I'll file a complaint." "File away," I said pleasantly. "Barbara already knows about it. The HOA can't do anything because it's protected under state law." "I'll sue you." "For what?" "Planting a legal, protected species on my own property." "Good luck with that." Karen stood there sputtering, unable to form coherent words. Finally, she stumped back into her house and slammed the door so hard I'm surprised the glass didn't shatter. I finished planting, watered everything thoroughly, and went inside feeling better than I had in months. Patricia looked at me with a mixture of amusement and concern. "You know this means war, right?" "Honey," I said, "the war started 6 months ago. I just brought in the heavy artillery." That night, I slept like a baby. The next morning, I found an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a formal letter from Karen, typed in all capital letters, threatening legal action, HOA penalties, and everything within my power to have that abomination removed. I made a copy and filed it away. Something told me I'd need documentation of her harassment. Over the next 2 weeks, Karen tried everything. She filed 9 separate HOA complaints. She called the city's code enforcement office. She even tried to claim the bamboo violated federal agricultural regulations. Every complaint was denied. Barbara called me one evening, and I could hear the laughter in her voice. "Tom, I have to tell you Karen showed up at my house tonight with a 3-inch binder full of evidence about why your bamboo is illegal. She's spent hours on this. And I told her the same thing I've told her 9 times already. It's a protected species, and the HOA has no legal authority to make you remove it." She actually stomped her foot like a toddler. I couldn't help laughing, but the best part was still to come. In December of 2023, we got our first hard freeze. I was worried it might damage the young bamboo plants, but when I checked on them, they were fine. Bamboo is remarkably hardy. What wasn't fine was Karen's Zen meditation garden. The freeze had killed her expensive imported Japanese maple tree, which had cost her $4,500. The tree had been her pride and joy, visible from her back windows. Now it was a skeleton of dead branches. I felt a little bad about that until I remembered the 47 complaints, the harassment, and the threat to sue me. Karen came outside as I was inspecting my bamboo. She looked haggard, like she hadn't slept well in weeks. "Enjoying your little victory?" She spat. "I'm sorry about your tree," I said, and I meant it. "But I didn't plant that bamboo to hurt you, Karen. I planted it because I'm tired of being harassed over every tiny aspect of my property. You filed complaints about my mailbox, my doormat, my garden, my wife's butterfly plants, and probably a dozen other things I've forgotten. I just want to live in peace. That bamboo will spread," she said quietly. "It will come under the fence. It will invade my property." "Actually, I installed a rhizome barrier," I said, pointing to the 3-foot-deep plastic barrier I'd put in place. "The bamboo will stay on my side of the property line. I'm not trying to damage your yard." "Karen, I'm just protecting mine." She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked back inside without another word. For about 2 weeks, things were quiet. Too quiet. Then, on a cold January morning in 2024, I found out what Karen had been planning. She'd filed a lawsuit not against me, but against the HOA and Barbara personally, claiming that Barbara had shown favoritism, violated HOA bylaws, and failed to properly enforce community standards. She was suing for $150,000 in damages. Barbara called me, and for the first time since I'd known her, she sounded scared. "Tom, I don't have that kind of money. Even if," he went on, "the HOA lawyer says, the legal fees could bankrupt me." I felt the rage building again. Karen wasn't just petty anymore. She was dangerous. But that's when something unexpected happened. The neighborhood rallied. Within 48 hours of news of the lawsuit spreading, 27 homeowners had signed a petition supporting Barbara. A legal defense fund was established, raising $12,300 in donations within 1 week. And then, the real miracle happened. At the next HOA meeting, a motion was introduced to remove Barbara as presidente motion that Karen had obviously orchestrated. It failed. Worse than failed it, received exactly 1 vote, Karenesi. Then another homeowner, a retired lawyer named Michael Torres, stood up. "I'd like to propose an amendment to our HOA bylaws," Michael said. "Specifically, that any homeowner who files more than 10 complaints in a 12-month period must pay a processing fee of $50 per complaint to cover administrative costs." The motion passed, unanimously minus 1 abstention from Karen, who sat in the corner looking like she'd been slapped. That night, the bamboo which had been dormant through the winter began showing its first spring shoots. They were beautiful, bright green, impossibly fast-growing, reaching toward the sky like nature's middle finger to Karen's reign of terror. I stood in my backyard, watching them grow almost visibly in the warm spring air, and I smiled. This was just the beginning. By March of 2024, my bamboo had grown 6 feet tall. By May, it was 12 feet. And by the time Karen realized what was really happening, it was already far too late to stop it. Spring of 2024 arrived with a vengeance, and so did my bamboo forest. The growth was explosive. Every morning, I'd measure the new shoots. 3 inches overnight, 4 inches. Once, during a particularly warm week, I measured 7 inches of growth in a single day. Patricia watched from the kitchen window, shaking her head in amazement. "I've never seen anything grow this fast," she said. "That's the beauty of bamboo," I replied. "Once it's established, nothing can stop it." Karen, of course, was losing her mind. I'd see her standing at her back window, binoculars in hand, watching the bamboo like it was an invading army, which, I suppose, from her perspective, it was. In February of 2024, she hired a property dispute lawyer named Richard Thornton with a reputation for being expensive and aggressive. He sent me a letter demanding I remove the bamboo immediately within 30 days. I took it to my own lawyer, Jennifer Martinez, who'd been handling property law for 27 years. Jennifer read it, smiled, and tossed it on her desk. "This is garbage," she said. "Golden bamboo is protected under state heritage laws. Don't respond. Let him waste his time." I followed her advice. 30 days passed. Nothing happened. Then 45 days. Still nothing. I later learned from Barbara that Karen had paid Richard Thornton a retainer of $8,500, only to be told after his research that there was no legal basis for forcing me to remove the bamboo. Karen demanded her money back. Thornton kept it. Citing the retainer agreement she'd signed, she tried to file a complaint with the State Bar Association, claiming he'd misled her. The complaint was dismissed. Meanwhile, my bamboo forest continued its relentless march toward the sky. By April of 2024, the bamboo had reached 9 feet tall, forming a solid green wall that completely blocked views between our properties. The peace was glorious. The real magic was happening underground. Bamboo rhizome spread horizontally, sending up new shoots as they go. The barrier I'd installed kept them contained on my property, but within my yard they were creating a network that would last for decades. I knew this because I'd consulted with Dr. Sarah Kim, a bamboo specialist from the State University, who'd been delighted when I told her my plans. "Golden bamboo is virtually indestructible once established," she'd said. "The rhizome system can survive fires, floods, even sustained freezing. Your grove could outlive your grandchildren's grandchildren." I loved that idea. Generations from now, long after Karen was gone, my bamboo would still be standing. In May of 2024, Karen's lawsuit against Barbara finally went to court. I attended the hearing. So did about 40 other neighbors, all there to support Barbara. Karen's lawyer, Differan, won this time, since Thornton had apparently refused to take the case stride to argue that Barbara had shown favoritism, and failed to properly enforce HOA regulations. The judge, a stern-looking woman named Margaret Foster, who appeared to be in her late 60s, listened for about 20 minutes before cutting the lawyer off. "Counselor," Judge Foster said, her voice sharp, "I've reviewed the HOA the complaint records and all the documentation your clients provided. Mrs. Chun denied complaints because they were frivolous or didn't violate any actual regulations. That's not favoritism. That's doing her job correctly." Karen's lawyer tried to object, but Judge Foster raised her hand. "I'm not finished. Furthermore, I've counted 73 complaints filed by your client in a 14-month period. 73. The next highest number of complaints from any single homeowner during that time was for... Your client isn't a victim of favoritism. She's a vexatious litigant who's been using the HOA complaint system to harass her neighbors." The courtroom was dead silent. "Motion to dismiss," Judge Foster said, "with prejudice. Mrs. Chun, I'm sorry you had to waste your time and money on this nonsense. Mrs. Whit, if you file another frivolous lawsuit in my courtroom, I will seriously consider sanctions. We're done here." The gavel came down. Karen sat in her seat, her face the color of old paper, while the courtroom erupted in quiet celebration. Barbara looked like she might cry from relief. Outside the courthouse, Barbara hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might crack. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for standing with me through all of this." "You stood with me first," I replied. "When Karen tried to take away my garden, my wife's butterfly plants, everything we'd worked for. You protected us. This is the least I could do." We celebrated that night with a neighborhood barbecue. 35 people showed up at our house, everyone bringing food and drinks. We set up tables in my backyard, right next to the bamboo forest, which was now 13 feet tall and impossibly lush. Karen's house remained dark all evening. Her car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. I imagined her sitting in her living room, listening to the sound of laughter and celebration from next door, knowing that she'd lost. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. In June of 2024, the Davidson family moved in on the other side of Karen's property, Rob and Michelle, with 2 kids aged 7 and 9. Rob was a software engineer, Michelle a nurse. The kids were energetic and loud, in that healthy way children should be. Within 2 weeks, they'd set up a trampoline. Within 3 weeks, Karen filed her first complaint: excessive noise and unsightly recreational equipment. Barbara called me the day she received the complaint. "It's starting again," she said, sounding tired. "Karen's going after the new family now." "Did you deny the complaint?" "Of course. The trampoline is within regulations, and children playing outside during daylight hours isn't a noise violation. But I have a feeling this is just the beginning." She was right. Over the next month, Karen filed 8 more complaints against the Davidsons. Their kids' bikes were parked incorrectly in the driveway. Their garbage cans were 6 inches too close to the street. Their welcome mat was faded and unsightly. Every complaint was denied. I decided to make a new friend. I walked over one Saturday morning with beer and cookies Patricia had baked. Rob answered, looking surprised. "Tom Richardson," I said. "Welcome to the neighborhood." "Rob Davidson. Come in. You're the guy with the bamboo forest, right?" We sat in his backyard while the kids played. I told him everything: Karen's harassment, the complaints, Barbara's lawsuit. "So we're in for a rough ride." Rob asked. "Karen tries to control everyone, but Barbara won't let bogus complaints through. The neighborhood has her back. Follow the rules, document everything. Don't let her intimidate you." "That's helpful," Rob said, though I have to admit, I was hoping for a quieter neighborhood experience. "It will be quiet," I assured him. "Karen's all bark and no bite. She tried to sue Barbara, and lost spectacularly. She tried to force me to remove my bamboo, and failed. She'll probably make your lives annoying for a while, but she can't actually hurt you unless you let her." Michelle came outside with fresh lemonade, and I repeated the information for her benefit. She looked concerned, but determined. "We're not going to let some bitter woman chase us out of our new home," Michelle said firmly. "We saved for 6 years to afford this house. Our kids love it here. We're staying. I raised my beer bottle. Welcome to Metabrook Estates. They clinked their glasses against my bottle, and I knew they'd be fine. But Karen wasn't done yet. In August of 2024, something happened that I hadn't anticipated. I was watering my bamboo one evening, not that it needed much water anymore, but I liked to give it some extra attention when I noticed something odd. There were fresh cuts on several of the bamboo stalks near the property line. Clean cuts, made with a sharp blade, about waist-high on the plants. Someone had tried to cut down my bamboo. I examined the damage carefully. Whoever had done it had cut about a dozen stalks, but they'd only managed to cut through about halfway before apparently giving up. Bamboo is remarkably tough. The stalks are almost as hard as wood. There was only one person who would do this. I set up a security camera that night, a good one, with night vision and motion detection, pointed directly at the bamboo forest and the property line. 3 nights later, at 2:30 in the morning, my phone buzzed with an alert. I opened the security app and watched in real time as Karen, wearing dark clothing and carrying a hatchet, crept into my backyard and began hacking at my bamboo. I was so shocked, I almost laughed. This was crazy. This was actually criminal. I called the police. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes. By that time, Karen had given up and returned to her house, but she'd managed to damage about 20 bamboo stalks. The officers reviewed the security footage. One of them, a young officer named Patterson, shook his head in disbelief. "That's pretty clear evidence of vandalism and criminal trespassing," he said. "Do you want to press charges?" I thought about it. Part of me wanted to throw the book at Karen. But another part of me, the part that was tired of all the conflict, just wanted it to be over. "Not yet," I said, "but I want this documented. If she does it again, I absolutely will press charges." The officers wrote up a report and said they'd have a conversation with Karen the next day. I uploaded the security footage to my computer and made 3 backup copies. The next morning, Officer Patterson knocked on Karen's door. I watched from my window as Karen answered, still in her bathrobe, her face going pale when she saw the police. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes. I couldn't hear what was said, but Karen's body language told the whole story. Defensive at first, deflated, then angry again. When the officers left, Karen slammed her door hard enough that I heard it from inside my house. I never saw her try to damage my bamboo again, but I kept the security cameras running, just in case. The damaged bamboo stalks recovered beautifully. That's another wonderful thing about bamboo. It's incredibly resilient. The cuts scarred over, and new shoots grew up around the damaged ones. Within 6 weeks, you couldn't even tell anything had happened. By September of 2024, my bamboo forest was 18 feet tall. It had become a neighborhood landmark. People would walk by just to look at it. Several neighbors asked me for advice on planting their own bamboo. I always told them the same thing. Make sure you really want it, because once it's established, it's forever. One evening in late September, I was sitting on my back porch with Patricia, watching the sunset through the bamboo stalks. The light filtered through the leaves, creating beautiful patterns on the ground. "Do you ever regret it?" Patricia asked quietly. "Planting the bamboo. Starting this whole thing." I thought about it carefully before answering. "No," I said, finally. Karen was never going to stop harassing us. She's the kind of person who needs to control everything around her. The bamboo didn't start the conflict, just ended it on my terms instead of hers. Patricia nodded slowly. "Barbara told me yesterday that the Davidsons filed a counter-complaint against Karen. Something about her measuring their property line and coming onto their land without permission." "Good for them," I said. "More people need to stand up to bullies like Karen." "The neighborhood's changed," Patricia observed. "When we first moved here, everyone was so friendly and welcoming. Now, there's this. I don't know, this tension. That's not our fault," I said firmly. "That's Karen's fault. She's the one who chose to make everyone miserable. We just refused to let her win." In October of 2024, Barbara called an HOA meeting to discuss new bylaws regarding complaints and neighbor disputes. The turnout was impressive. Over 60 homeowners showed up, which was nearly 80% of the neighborhood. Barbara presented a comprehensive new policy that included a limit of 5 complaints per homeowner per year without fees, a fee of $75 for each complaint beyond the 5-complaint limit, mandatory mediation for disputes between neighbors before complaints could be filed, penalties for filing complaints that were knowingly false or frivolous. The policy was designed to stop people like Karen without hurting legitimate concerns from reasonable homeowners. The vote was 58 in favor, 1 against, 1 abstention. Karen, predictably, was the single against vote. After the meeting, Karen stood up and addressed the room. "You're all making a huge mistake," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "This Oye used to stand for something. We used to have standards. Now you're just letting people do whatever they want, and property values will plummet. You'll regret this." The only thing I regret, someone called out it, was Michael Torres, the retired lawyer who'd helped during Barbara's lawsuit, is that we didn't implement these policies sooner. "You've abused the complaint system, Karen. These new rules are necessary because of you." The room murmured in agreement. Karen grabbed her purse and left without another word. As November approached, I noticed that Karen's house had a for sale sign in the front yard. I wasn't surprised. She'd lost her lawsuit. Her campaign to control the neighborhood had failed. She'd been caught on camera vandalizing my property, and now the HOA had implemented policies specifically designed to stop her harassment. She was done. The bamboo forest, now 20 feet tall and magnificently full, swayed gently in the autumn breeze. It was beautiful. It was permanent, and it was a daily reminder that some battles are worth fighting. Patricia squeezed my hand as we stood in the backyard, looking at what we'd created. "It really is gorgeous," she said softly. "Yes," I agreed. "It really is." 3 weeks later, Karen's house sold. I never saw her again. According to Barbara, who heard it from the real estate agent, Karen moved to a neighborhood 3 towns over. I hope she found peace there. Primera rea. Gido. But in my backyard, the bamboo continues to grow, a living monument to standing your ground and refusing to be bullied. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind rustles through the stalks, I smile and think, this was absolutely worth it. When Karen's replacement neighbors moved in, they asked me the one question I'd been waiting a year to answer: "Can you teach us how to plant bamboo?" That's when I knew I'd started something beautiful. December of 2024 brought the first real cold snap, and with it, a new family moving into Karen's old house. I was stringing Christmas lights when the moving truck pulled up. A couple in their early 40s emerged with 3 teenage kids who immediately helped unload. The man waved and walked over with a friendly smile. "Hey there, I'm James Park. That's my wife Susan, and our kids Emily, Daniel, and Sophie." "Tom Richardson," I said, shaking his hand. "Welcome to Metabrook Estates. We heard there was some drama with the previous owner," James said carefully. I laughed. "That's putting it mildly. But she's gone now, and things are much better. If you have any questions about the neighborhood or the HOA, feel free to ask." "Actually," James said, his eyes drifting to my backyard where the top of the bamboo forest was visible, "we're really curious about that bamboo. It's absolutely spectacular." "Thanks," I said, feeling a surge of pride. "It's been quite a journey." Over the next week, I got to know the Park family. They were exactly the kind of neighbors you'd want: friendly, respectful, and genuinely interested in being part of the community. Susan was a landscape architect, which explained their immediate fascination with my bamboo. She came over one afternoon with a notebook, asking detailed questions about the species, growth rate, and maintenance requirements. "I've worked with bamboo in commercial projects," she told me, sitting at my kitchen table with Patricia serving fresh coffee. "But I've never seen a residential installation this successful. You've essentially created a microclimate back there. The temperature is probably 3 to 4 degrees cooler in summer, and the bamboo acts as a natural sound barrier too." "Really?" Patricia asked, genuinely interested. "Absolutely. Absolutely. Bamboo forests create their own weather systems on a small scale. The density of the planting, the height, The way the stalks move in, the wind, it's perfect. And the fact that it's a protected heritage species, that's brilliant planning on Tom's part. I told them the whole story. All of it: Karen's harassment, the complaints, the lawsuit, the attempted vandalism. James listened with growing amazement. So you planted this entire forest essentially as a property defense system? That was part of it, I admitted, but honestly, it's become so much more. I love this bamboo now. It's beautiful. It's peaceful. And yes, it protected us from someone who wanted to control every aspect of our lives. We love it, Susan said firmly. We looked at 6 other houses before this one. But when we saw your bamboo forest from the back windows, we knew this was the right place. It's stunning. That made me feel better than I'd expected. In January of 2025, Barbara called me with interesting news. Tom, you're not going to believe this. 3 more families in the neighborhood want to plant bamboo now. They've all asked me about HOA regulations and mentioned they were inspired by your forest. I was stunned. 3 families. The Johnsons on Oak Street, the Martinez family on Maple Drive, and the Hendersons over on Birch Lane. They all want to create privacy screens. The Johnsons specifically mentioned they're tired of their neighbors being able to see directly into their backyard from a 2nd-story window. That's a legitimate use, I said. Are you going to approve it? I already did. They're all following the same protocol. You did proper rhizome barriers, staying within property boundaries, and using the protected heritage species. I can't deny their applications just because some people might not like bamboo. Some people meaning who? Barbara laughed. There's a small group, maybe 4 or 5 homeowners, who think bamboo is invasive and dangerous. They tried to start a petition to ban it. The petition got exactly 7 signatures out of 72 households. Let me guess, all 7 people were Karen's friends. Bingo. And 2 of them have already moved away. The bamboo movement had begun. By March of 2025, 6 families in Metabrook Estates had planted bamboo. Each installation was different. Some were small privacy screens, others were larger groves like mine. But all of them followed proper containment procedures and used protected species. The neighborhood was transforming into something greener, more private, and honestly, more beautiful. But not everyone was happy about it. In April of 2025, Gregory Bartlett, who lived 4 houses down, filed a complaint with the county zoning board claiming bamboo plantings violated residential zoning laws. Barbara called an emergency meeting. 43 homeowners attended. Gregory stood at the front, his face red with anger. This bamboo epidemic is destroying our neighborhood. Property values are going to collapse. Susan Park raised her hand. May I respond? She asked, calmly. Susan stood with a folder of documents. I'm a licensed landscape architect with 18 years of experience. Each bamboo installation uses proper barriers. Each uses protected heritage species. And regarding property values, she pulled out a paper. Average home sale prices have increased by 6.3% since bamboo plantings began. The county average was 4.1%. The room erupted in whispers. That's correlation, not causation. Gregory sputtered. Perhaps, Susan said smoothly, but it certainly disproves your claim that bamboo is harming property values. If anything, it's making our neighborhood more desirable. People want privacy. They want green spaces. And they want unique features that set their property apart. Michael Torres, the retired lawyer, stood up next. I'd like to add that I've researched Mr. Bartlett's complaint to the zoning board. It has no legal merit. Ornamental bamboo plantings do not constitute agricultural use under any definition in county code. The zoning board will dismiss it. And Mr. Bartlett knows that this is harassment, plain and simple. Gregory's face went from red to purple. This isn't over, he shouted. I'll fight this until every piece of that invasive garbage is removed. Good luck with that, James Pard called out, and several people laughed. The meeting ended with Barbara officially denying Gregory's complaint to the HOA. 3 days later, the county zoning board dismissed his complaint as well, exactly as Michael had predicted. Gregory's house went up for sale 2 weeks later. I felt a little bad about that, but only a little. He'd tried to destroy something beautiful because it didn't fit his narrow vision of what the neighborhood should be. In May of 2025, something wonderful happened. The local newspaper ran a feature story about our neighborhood titled "The Bamboo Community," how one neighborhood embraced green living. The article was sympathetic and it talked about my original planting, Karen's harassment, and how the neighborhood had rallied around both Barbara and the principle of homeowner freedom. But the best part was what came next. 3 days after the article ran, I got a call from Dr. Sarah Kim, the bamboo specialist from the State University. "Tom, I just read the article about your neighborhood. This is incredible. Would you be willing to let me bring some of my graduate students to study your bamboo installation? It could be a fantastic case study on urban bamboo cultivation." "Of course," I said, flattered. "When did you want to come by?" "How about next week?" Dr. Kim arrived with 6 graduate students, all carrying measuring equipment, cameras, and notebooks. They spent 3 hours examining my bamboo forest, measuring stalk diameter, counting nodes, testing soil composition, and documenting the rhizome barrier system. "This is a textbook example of proper bamboo installation," Dr. Kim told the students. "Notice the barrier depth 36 inches, which is 6 inches more than the minimum requirement. Notice the spacing between original plants 18 inches, which promoted rapid growth formation while allowing adequate growing room. This is exactly what I teach, executed perfectly." One of the students, a young woman named Priya, asked me, "Did you have a background in botany or landscaping?" "No," I admitted. "I'm a retired civil engineer. I just did a lot of research before I started." "That's even more impressive," Priya said. "Most people don't have the patience to research this thoroughly. They just plant and hope for the best." Dr. Kim turned to me with a proposal. "Tom, would you be willing to write up a brief case study about your experience? We're putting together a handbook on residential bamboo cultivation. Your story, including the legal research about heritage species protections, would be invaluable." "I'd be honored," I said. Over the next 2 months, I worked with Dr. Kim to write a 10-page case study titled "Urban Bamboo Installation," a case study in legal compliance and community impact. The paper was published in a landscape architecture journal in August of 2020. It included photos of my installation, copies of my rhizome barrier specifications, and a detailed timeline of the growth over 2 years. I was ridiculously proud of it. But the real impact came from unexpected places. In September of 2025, I started getting emails. Lots of them. Homeowners from across the state, eventually across the country, writing to ask about bamboo installation. People who were dealing with difficult HOAs, intrusive neighbors, or just wanted to create beautiful privacy screens. I answered every single email. I shared my research, my specifications, and my experiences. I warned people about the Commit Me Bambuus Permanent and encouraged them to check their local laws and HOA regulations. Patricia would find me at my computer late at night, typing away. "You've become the bamboo ambassador," she'd say, laughing. "Someone has to help people stand up for their property rights," I'd reply. And I meant it. One email particularly stuck with me. It was from a woman named Carol in Oregon, who was being harassed by her HOA over a vegetable garden, just like I had been. "Your story gave me hope," she wrote. "I've been fighting with my HOA for 2 years. They've filed 17 complaints against me over completely legal improvements to my property. Reading about how you found a legal way to protect yourself and create something beautiful, it made me realize I don't have to just take it. I can fight back intelligently." I wrote back immediately, sharing resources and encouragement. 3 months later, Carol emailed again. She'd researched native plants in Oregon that were legally protected, found several species suitable for privacy screens, and planted them along her property line. Her HOA had tried to make her remove them and failed. "I'm sitting in my backyard right now," her email read, "looking at the 6-foot hedge of native Pacific wax myrtles I planted. My neighbor, the one who's been filing all the complaints, can't see into my yard anymore, and there's nothing she can do about it. Thank you for showing me this was possible." I showed the email to Patricia, feeling a surge of emotion I hadn't expected. You've helped a lot of people, Patricia said softly. This thing with Coronet wasn't just about us. It was about standing up to bullies everywhere. By October of 2020, my bamboo forest had reached its mature height of 22 feet. It was magnificent, a thick, lush wall of green that swayed gently in the wind, creating a soft, rustling sound that I'd grown to love. The Park family had planted their own bamboo along the opposite property line, creating a beautiful corridor between our houses. Susan had designed it expertly, with curved lines that made it look natural rather than defensive. It feels like we're living in a private park, Emily Park told me one afternoon. She was sitting on her back porch, reading a book. I can actually relax out here without feeling like the whole neighborhood is watching. That was the point, I thought. Privacy. Peace. The ability to enjoy your own property without constant surveillance and judgment. In November of 2025, Barbara announced she was stepping down as HOA president. She'd served for 11 years and felt it was time to let someone else take over. The neighborhood threw her a retirement party. Over 60 people attended, bringing food, gifts, and heartfelt thanks. I gave a short speech, talking about how Barbara had protected homeowners' rights even when it was difficult, how she'd stood up to bullies and harassers, and how she'd made Metabrook Estates a genuinely great place to live. Barbara taught us that leadership isn't about control, I said. It's about service. It's about protecting people's freedom to live their lives while maintaining the standards that make a community strong. We're all better off because of her. The room erupted in applause, and Barbara wiped tears from her eyes. Michael Therese was elected as the new HOA president. His first official act was to commission a plaque honoring Barbara's service, which was installed at the entrance to the neighborhood. His second act was to officially adopt the Bamboo Best Practices Guidelines that I'd developed, making them part of the HOA as reference materials for anyone interested in planting bamboo. As December of 2025 arrived, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. 2 years earlier, I'd been angry, frustrated, and tired of being harassed. I'd planted bamboo as an act of defiance away to protect my property and my peace of mind. But it had become so much more than that. The bamboo had transformed our neighborhood. It had brought people together around principles of property rights and personal freedom. It had created beauty and privacy, and it had inspired people across the country to stand up for themselves. On Christmas Eve, Patricia and I stood in our backyard, looking at the bamboo forest strung with white lights. The Park family had done the same, and the effect was magical to glowing corridors of light and green, creating a private wonderland. "It's beautiful," Patricia whispered. "Yes," I agreed. "It really is." And standing there, listening to the gentle rustle of bamboo in the winter wind, I realized something important. Karen had tried to make me miserable. She'd tried to control me, to break me down, to force me into submission. Instead, she'd inspired me to create something permanent and beautiful, something that would outlive both of us. Standing as a testament to the importance of standing your ground. The bamboo would be here long after I was gone. Future families would enjoy its shade and privacy. Children would play beneath its canopy. And maybe, just maybe, someone would remember the story of why it was planted, not as an act of revenge, but as an act of defiance against those who seek to control others. That was a legacy I could be proud of. 5 years after planting that first bamboo shoot, I received a letter that made me realize this story was never really about bamboo at all. It was about something far more important. January of 2026 marked the 3rd anniversary of my bamboo forest, and the neighborhood had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. 14 families now had bamboo installations. The neighborhood had earned a nickname in the local real estate market, the Bamboo Community. And according to Susan Park's analysis, property values had increased by 17.2% over 3 years, more than double the county average. But the real changes were subtler and more meaningful. People had privacy now. Real privacy. Backyards that had once felt exposed now felt like private sanctuaries. Children played freely without feeling watched. Adults could relax on their patios without neighbors commenting on their business. The HOA had transformed. Under Michael Torres's leadership, the focus had shifted from nitpicking enforcement to genuine community building. Complaint filings had dropped by 73%. Neighborhood satisfaction surveys showed approval ratings at 91%, the highest in the HOA's 20-year history. But this story isn't about statistics. It's about what happened one cold morning in February of 2020. I was having coffee in my kitchen when the doorbell rang. Patricia answered it and called me over. A young woman stood on our porch, maybe 25 years old, with nervous eyes and a folder clutched in her hands. "Are you Tom Richardson?" she asked. "I am. Can I help you?" "My name is Rachel Morrison. I read your case study on bamboo cultivation, and I read the newspaper article about your neighborhood. I was hoping I could talk to you about my situation." We invited her in. Over coffee, Rachel told us her story. She lived in a neighborhood 3 towns over, where her Hakoah Presidenta, a woman named Diane, had been systematically harassing her for 18 months. The harassment had started when Rachel painted her front door a shade of blue that Diane claimed violated HOA regulations, even though the exact same shade was approved in the bylaw. "It sounds exactly like what happened to you with Karen," Rachel said, her voice shaking slightly. "Diane files complaints about everything. My garden is unkempt, even though I maintain it carefully. My car is parked incorrectly even when it's perfectly straight. She's even complained about my dog barking, and I don't have a dog." "Have you talked to your HOA board?" Patricia asked gently. "Diane is the board," Rachel said bitterly. "She's president, treasurer, and secretary. She essentially runs everything alone because no one else wants to deal with her. And when I tried to run for a board position to challenge her, she changed the bylaws to require 3 years of residency. I've only lived there for 2 years. I felt a familiar anger rising. This was Karen all over again. This was the same pattern of abuse and control. "Why did you come to me?" I asked. Rachel opened her folder and pulled out a copy of my published case study. "Because you found a way to fight back that was legal, permanent, and actually made things better. I don't want revenge. I just want peace. I want to be able to live in my home without constant harassment. And I was hoping you could help me figure out how." Over the next 2 hours, I worked with Rachel to research her local laws and HOA bylaws. We discovered that her county had protections for native oak trees that were over 20 years old. Her property had 3 mature oaks that Diane had been pressuring her to trim back because they've dropped too many leaves on neighboring properties. "Don't touch those trees," Primetta told Rachel. "They're protected, and if Diane keeps pressuring you about them, document everything. Then contact the county environmental office. Harassment about protected trees is actually a legal issue, not just an HOA matter." Rachel's eyes widened. "I didn't know that." "Most people don't. That's how people like Diane maintain power through intimidation and exploiting people's ignorance of their rights." I gave Rachel a list of resources: environmental lawyers, property rights organizations, and HOA reform groups. I also gave her my phone number and email. "If you need advice or just someone to talk to who's been through this, reach out any time," I said. Rachel left looking more hopeful than when she'd arrived. 2 weeks later, she emailed me. She'd contacted the county environmental office about Diane's pressure to trim the protected oak trees. The county had sent Diane a cease and desist letter warning that any further harassment about the trees would result in fines. Diane had stopped filing complaints against Rachel entirely. "It's like magic," Rachel wrote. "One letter from the county, and suddenly she's leaving me alone. Thank you so much for showing me I had options." But Rachel wasn't the only person who reached out. Over the next 3 months, I heard from 47 people across the country dealing with similar situations. Some had abusive HOA presidents. Others had nightmare neighbors. A few were dealing with local government officials who were overstepping their authority. I helped where I could. Sometimes that meant researching local laws. Sometimes it meant connecting people with resources. And sometimes it just meant listening and validating that yes, what they were experiencing was wrong. And no, they didn't have to accept it. Patricia watched this new phase of my life with a mixture of amusement and concern. "You've become the patron saint of HOA victims," she said one evening as I typed yet another long email to someone in Texas. "Someone has to help," I replied. "These people are desperate. They feel powerless, and most of them just need someone to show them that they're not alone and that there are legal ways to fight back." "I'm proud of you," Patricia said softly. "What started as a personal battle has turned into something that's helping people everywhere." In April of 2026, something extraordinary happened. Dr. Sarah Kim called me with an invitation. A national landscaping conference was being held in Chicago, and they wanted me to speak on a panel about residential landscaping and property rights. "Me," I said, shocked. "I'm not a landscape architect. I'm just a retired engineer who planted some bamboo." "You're exactly who they want," Dr. Kim said. "You represent the homeowner perspective. You did the research, followed the law, and created something beautiful while standing up for your rights. That's a story people need to hear." I accepted the invitation. In June of 2026, Patricia and I flew to Chicago. The conference was massive, over 2,000 landscape professionals, architects, and urban planners. I was incredibly nervous. The panel included 3 landscape architects with decades of experience, a city planning official, and me, the amateur who'd planted bamboo to spite a difficult neighbor. But when I told my story, something amazing happened. The room was absolutely silent. 2,000 people listening to every word about Karen, the harassment, the research, the bamboo, and everything that came after. When I finished, the room erupted in applause that lasted almost 2 minutes. During the Q&A session, a woman in the back raised her hand. "I'm an HOA president in Florida," she said. "Your story makes me think about all the times I've dismissed homeowner concerns because I was focused on maintaining standards. How do you balance community standards with individual property rights?" I thought carefully before answering. "Standards are important," I said, "but standards should serve the community, not control it. The moment you start using rules to target individuals or enforce your personal preferences, you've crossed the line from leadership to tyranny." A good HOA protects property values by creating a pleasant place to live, and that includes respecting homeowners' freedom to enjoy their property within reasonable boundaries. The woman nodded thoughtfully, and I saw several other HOA board members in the audience writing notes. After the panel, I was approached by dozens of people wanting to talk, homeowners sharing their stories, HOA board members asking for advice on better governance, even a few lawyers interested in property rights issues. But the conversation that mattered most was with a man named David, no relation to Barbara. As far as I knew, David was a civil rights attorney who specialized in housing discrimination and property rights. "Your case is more important than you realize," David told me over coffee after the conference. "What you documented the harassment, the legal research, the successful defense of your rights. That's a template. I've been working on HOA reform legislation in my state, and your story is exactly the kind of real-world example that helps lawmakers understand why these reforms are necessary." "I'm not sure I understand," I said. "HOAs are essentially private governments," David explained. "They have real power over people's lives. But unlike real governments, they often lack the checks and balances that prevent abuse. What happened to you with Courtroom? What you did to protect yourself illustrates both the problem and the solution. Individual homeowners need to know their legal rights and be empowered to defend them." David asked if he could use my story and testimony before the state legislature. I agreed immediately. Flying home from Chicago, Patricia held my hand and said, "You know this is bigger than us now, right? This thing you started, it's become a movement." I looked out the airplane window at the patchwork of neighborhoods below, wondering how many of them had their own Karens, their own conflicts over property rights, their own people who felt powerless against petty tyrants. "Maybe it needed to be bigger," I said. In August of 2026, David invited me to testify before the state legislature's housing committee about HOA reform legislation. The proposed law would require HOA boards to have at least 3 members to prevent one-person control, limit complaint filings to reasonable numbers to prevent harassment, mandate mediation before legal action in most HOA disputes, Protect homeowners who plant native and heritage species from HOA interference. Create penalties for HOA board members who abuse their authority. I told my story to the committee. I brought photos of my bamboo forest, copies of Karen's complaints, and documentation of everything that had happened. Several legislators asked questions. One woman, a representative named Angela Martinez, seemed particularly engaged. Mr. Richardson, in your opinion, what's the core problem with HOA governance that allows situations like yours to develop? Accountability, I answered, or rather, the lack of it. When one person can control an entire HOA without oversight, when there's no consequence for filing frivolous complaints or abusing authority, it creates an environment where bullies thrive. Good people like Barbara Chunauer, former HOA president, work hard to prevent abuse, but the system shouldn't depend on having good people in charge. It should have structural protections that prevent abuse, regardless of who's in charge. Representative Martinez nodded, making notes. The legislation passed 3 months later with bipartisan support. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. David Chun called me the day it was signed into law. You did this, he said. Your story, your testimony, that's what made legislators understand why this mattered. Karen did this, I replied. If she hadn't been such a nightmare, none of this would have happened. David laughed. I suppose that's one way to look at it. Sometimes the worst people inspire the best changes. As fall of 2026 arrived, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened since that November day in 2023 when I'd planted my first bamboo shoot. The bamboo was now 25 feet tall, magnificent and mature. It would continue growing for decades, possibly centuries. Long after Patricia and I were gone, that bamboo would still be standing, a living reminder of one person's refusal to be bullied. But the real legacy wasn't the bamboo. It was the people who'd found the courage to stand up for themselves. It was the legislation that would protect homeowners from abuse. It was the conversations about property rights and community governance that my story had sparked. One evening in late October, I was sitting on my back porch, listening to the bamboo rustle in the wind, when my phone rang. It was Barbara Chun. Tom, I just wanted you to know I've been asked to consult on HOA governance for 3 different neighborhoods. They want to avoid the problems we had and create better systems. They're using Metabrook estates as a model for how things should work. That's wonderful, Barbara. You deserve that recognition. You kept our neighborhood together when it could have fallen apart. We kept it together, Barbara corrected gently. You showed people they could stand up for themselves. I just tried to be fair. But together, we proved that communities work better when they're built on respect and freedom, not control and fear. After the call ended, I sat in the growing darkness, watching the shadows of bamboo stalks dance across my yard. Patricia came outside and sat beside me, wrapping a blanket around both of us. Happy? She asked. Yeah, I said. I really am. Any regrets? I thought about Karen. About the stress and anger and conflict. I thought about the time spent researching laws and fighting complaints. I thought about all of it. No, I said finally, not a single one. We stood our ground. We did it legally and ethically, and we turned something negative into something positive that's helping people we'll never even meet. The bamboo is beautiful, Patricia said softly. Yes, I agreed. But it's not about the bamboo anymore. It never really was. What was it about? Dignity, I said. The simple human dignity of being able to live in your own home without constant harassment and control. Everyone deserves that. And if my story helps even one person claim that dignity for themselves, then everything was worth it. We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the wind in the bamboo. Somewhere across the country, someone was probably reading my case study, or watching a video about the bamboo community, or hearing about HOA reform legislation. Maybe they were dealing with their own Karen, feeling hopeless and powerless. And maybe they were learning that they didn't have to accept abuse, that there were legal ways to fight back, that they could stand their ground and create something beautiful from conflict. That's the real legacy. Not bamboo, but hope. As the stars came out above our backyard, I thought about the future. About families who would live in this house decades from now, enjoying the shade of bamboo planted by people they'd never know. About neighborhoods that would adopt better governance because we'd shown it was possible. About individuals who would find the courage to defend their rights because they'd heard that someone else had done it successfully. The bamboo would outlive us all. But more importantly, the example would too. And that, I realized, was exactly as it should be. Some roots go deeper than we ever imagine.